December 11, 1943. Over the North Sea, 18,000 feet, the B-17 Heavenly Stranger shuddered as freezing winds clawed at its aluminum skin. Frost crept across the plexiglass bubbles like white spiderwebs. Inside the tail compartment, 19-year-old Staff Sergeant William "Will" Harlow pulled his heated gloves tighter and breathed into the cold air. His breath crystallized instantly. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not today. Not on his 7th mission. He was supposed to be back on the ground at Molesworth, drinking bitter coffee and pretending he wasn't terrified of the next one. But here he was, bolted into the narrow coffin-like tail of a flying fortress, staring into endless gray sky and waiting for the German fighters he knew would come. The interphone crackled. "Tail, this is Pilot. How's it looking back there?" Harlow pressed his throat mic. "Clear for now, sir. Just clouds." He didn't mention how hard his leg was shaking, or how he hadn't slept the night before. Tail gunners were the first to die and the last to be found. The Luftwaffe preferred attacking from the rear, where armor was thinnest, and a man's hesitation, just a second, meant the difference between life and a 10,000-foot drop into the North Sea. The formation of the 303rd Bomb Group powered westward, engines thundering. It was a sound Harlow would never forget. 4 Wright cyclones beating together like the pulse of a living beast. Ahead of them, waves of B-17s climbed toward Germany, windows shimmering like ice. Over interphone, the navigator's voice cut in. "Passing checkpoint Able 3, 10 minutes to the coast." 10 minutes until the Luftwaffe scrambled. Harlow adjusted the twin .50 caliber Brownings beside him. The metal was so cold it felt brittle. He gave the charging handles a quick pull, clack clack, then leaned forward, hunched under the tiny glass dome. Down below lay thick cloud layers covering the sea, stretching to the horizon like an unbroken blanket. He hated days like this. Days when the sun vanished. Days when anything could erupt from those clouds. A low rumble vibrated the fuselage. Flak bursts? No, too early. Just turbulence. He exhaled slowly. Then he felt it, an instinct more than a sound. A disturbance behind the aircraft, distant, but wrong. He scanned the sky. Nothing. Just gray. The pilot spoke again. "All stations, keep your eyes sharp. Radar reports fighters lifting from Leeuwarden and Oldenburg." 10 seconds passed. 20. Then a warning shout across interphone. "Bandits! Bandits! 6 o'clock high!" Harlow jerked upward. His heart slammed against his ribs. Through the haze, tiny black specks formed. First 2, then 5, then a whole cluster. They shimmered in and out of visibility, silhouettes cutting through clouds like knives. The shapes grew sharper, angular, deadly. Messerschmitts. 6 Bf-109s closing fast, the waist gunner yelled. But Harlow couldn't see them, not clearly. They were approaching from a steep, high angle, his blind spot, the one direction he couldn't cover, the one flaw the Germans loved exploiting. His body tensed. "Tell the pilot, I've lost visual. They're coming in from my dead zone." "Copy, hold your fire until they break." He wanted to scream. Hold his fire? He was the only thing between those fighters and 40 men across the back half of the formation. A burst of cannon fire streaked past the tail, bright orange flashes tearing through the clouds. One round slammed into the left horizontal stabilizer, sending a metallic shriek through the aircraft. "They've opened up! They're diving through the blind spot!" Harlow shouted. He yanked his guns downward, but the angle was wrong, too steep. The 109s were ghosts, skimming through a patch of sky he physically couldn't see. He was helpless. Cannon shells stitched the air again. A B-17 2 positions below took a direct hit, an explosion of fire and debris. Harlow felt the shockwave rattle his bones. He had seconds left before Heavenly Stranger was next. His training screamed, "Don't fire blind," but survival told him something else. He clenched the triggers and swept the guns across the empty sky. Blind. No target, no confirmation, just instinct and desperation. A stream of .50 caliber tracers carved glowing arcs upward, disappearing into the mist. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a dark shape burst through the cloud directly into his line of fire. A Bf-109. It rolled sideways, smoke pouring from its nose, then spiraled violently downward, trailing flame. Harlow froze. He hadn't even known it was there. The interphone exploded with shouting, "Tail, you got one! Jesus Christ, you hit one!" But there was no time to celebrate. A second 109 lunged through the same cloud bank, diving low. Harlow swung the guns, fire lancing out. The tracers stitched across the fighter's wing route, and the Messerschmitt broke apart mid-air, pieces tumbling like burning leaves. "Another one! Tail gunner just splashed a second bandit!" Harlow didn't believe it. He didn't process it. His ears rang, his breath shook, and his hands kept firing long after the last fighter peeled away. The surviving 109s pulled back, unwilling to press an attack where two of their own had just been killed by what looked like impossible reflex. Inside the fortress, no one spoke for several seconds. Then the pilot's voice, quiet, stunned. "Tail, you just saved this aircraft." Harlow didn't answer. He simply stared into the gray sky, where death had been seconds ago, and let the tremor in his hands settle. December 11th, 1943, over the North Sea. For nearly a full minute, the only sound inside the B-17 Heavenly Stranger was the deep, rhythmic thunder of the four Wright cyclones and the faint hiss of wind clawing at the fuselage. The interphone had gone quiet, not with calm, but with disbelief. In the tail compartment, Will Harlow kept his hands on the cooling Browning grips. His gloves shook. He tried to steady them, but the tremor pulsed all the way up his arms. He wasn't sure if it was fear, or adrenaline, or the aftershock of realizing he should have died moments ago. The waist gunner finally broke the silence. "Tail, what the hell did you just do back there?" Harlow swallowed hard. I don't know. They were in the blind spot. I couldn't see a damn thing." But his hands, without his brain's permission, had found the exact angle, the exact timing, the exact burst. The pilot, Lieutenant Raymond Callahan, spoke next. His voice was calm, but carried an undertone of awe. "You hit two fighters you couldn't see. That's not luck, son. That's something else." Harlow didn't answer. He couldn't. His thoughts were still spinning, replaying the last seconds before the sky erupted. Those shapes breaking through cloud cover. That sudden snap of instinct. The way his fingers squeezed the triggers before he'd consciously decided to fire. A man didn't admit fear in the tail. Not out loud. Not if he wanted to keep the respect of the crew. But for the first time since arriving in England, Harlow understood what the veterans meant when they said combat sharpened the senses in ways no training ever could. Outside, the cloud layer thinned as the formation neared the German coastline. The sun broke through in pale gold slivers that reflected off the formation, steel birds gliding into enemy territory. The radio man called out, "Crossing the coast, flak expected." Expected was an understatement. Almost immediately, black puffs blossomed around the formation, small at first, then rapidly multiplying. Each burst carried the crack of fragmentation shells designed to rip into aluminum hulls and flesh alike. "Flak, moderate, 12 o'clock, the bombardier shouted. The fortress lurched as a near burst rocked the right wing. The shock jolted Harlow so hard, he slammed his helmet against the tail frame. He hissed through his teeth. "Damn it, these boys are awake today." Flak bursts bracketed them in tight patterns, proof the German radar had them dialed in perfectly. The sky looked like boiling ink. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage like handfuls of thrown gravel. The interphone buzzed again. "Tail, you holding up?" Callahan asked. "I'm good, sir. Still on watch." But that wasn't entirely true. His ribs hurt, his head throbbed, and beneath the cold metal floor plates, the fortress groaned like a wounded animal. Ahead of them, the contrails of the 303rd snaked into the distance. Black smoke trails marked the places where one or two fortresses had already fallen out of formation, a sight every airman dreaded, because everyone knew what happened to stragglers. Another flak burst detonated directly beneath the tail. Harlow's teeth clacked together from the shock. A fragment tore through the lower plexiglass and lodged in the metal spar behind his calves. "That was close," the waist gunner yelled. "No kidding," Harlow muttered, pushing himself upright. But even through the storm of flak, he kept scanning the rear quarter. He didn't trust the Germans to stay gone. Luftwaffe pilots were notorious for ambushing after flak zones, waiting for fortresses to break formation or suffer damage, then sweeping in like vultures. Harlow steadied his breath and leaned into the guns, because he knew that nothing about the earlier attack was over. And he was right. A flash of movement flickered low at the edge of his peripheral vision. A shadow, a glint, a predatory darting motion. He snapped his guns toward it. "Movement! 6 o'clock low, coming fast!" This time, the enemy didn't try the blind spot. They came from directly below the tail, a classic Bf-109 underbelly climb. The angle was steep, the attack ruthless. 3 fighters. No, 4. They were using the smoke and debris from the flak to mask their approach. The interphone erupted. "Tail's got bandits! Multiple bandits!" The fighters rose from the haze like attacking sharks, yellow-nosed Messerschmitts, their props blurred into a single sheet of metal. Their cannons fired long, glowing spears of tracer, and one of them, aimed directly for Heavenly Stranger. Harlow braced his boots against the tailframe and swung the guns. His tracers streaked downward in bright ribbons. The fighters zigzagged, corkscrewed, tried to slip between bursts. He held the trigger, letting instinct dictate the line, the timing, the breathing. The cockpit of the lead 109 filled his sight. Too close, too fast. "Brake! Brake!" someone yelled. But the pilot couldn't brake, not in tight formation, not over heavy flak. Harlow screamed into the freezing compartment and squeezed the triggers again, long, violent bursts that shook the entire tail. Tracer streams converged perfectly. The 109 exploded into a fireball. The shockwave kicked the B-17 sideways. Debris and flames whipped past the tail dome. A wing fragment slammed off the stabilizer with a loud metallic clang. The remaining fighters scattered. Harlow exhaled, half in pain, half in rage, and half in disbelief that he was still alive to feel either. "Tail," the pilot finally said, voice trembling despite his effort to sound steady. "You've got one hell of a guardian angel back there." Harlow stared through the smoke-filled sky. No angel, he thought, just a 19-year-old kid who didn't want to die today. December 11th, 1943. Inside the B-17 Heavenly Stranger, somewhere above Germany. Smoke drifted past the tail like thin black ribbons. The explosion of the Messerschmitt still echoed in Will Harlow's skull, mixing with the vibration of the airframe and the constant growl of engines under strain. His breath came in short bursts. Sweat gathered along his brow despite the freezing temperatures. He didn't have a moment to rest. "Tail, report damage," the pilot demanded. Harlow ran a quick hand over the armor plate and the structural spar beside him. "Tail turret functional. Stabilizer took a hit, but nothing critical. I'm still in it." Relief washed over the interphone. No one wanted the tail gunner down, not after what he'd just done. Another voice crackled in, the engineer this time. "Tail, that explosion shoved us off course. Pilot's trying to correct. Hold tight." The fortress steadied itself, but barely. The formation ahead was tightening, each B-17 holding position with the precision of men who'd learned the price of drifting out of pattern. Harlow forced his breathing into rhythm. His heartbeat was a hammer inside his ribs. He kept his eyes locked on the horizon, left, right, high, low, scanning for shapes that didn't belong. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Finally, the radio man spoke. "We're 5 out from the IP." 5 minutes to the initial point, the turn toward the target. After that came the bomb run, the most dangerous stretch of any mission. Straight, level, predictable. The Luftwaffe and the flak gunners loved that part. The interphone crackled with tension. "All stations, prepare for heavy resistance." Ahead, sunlight reflected off rivers snaking through winter fields. Below them sat the first signs of the target area: smoke columns, rail yards, anti-aircraft batteries. The fortress began its approach. Inside the tail, a thin hum built up, Harlow's nerves buzzing so sharply he could almost hear them. His fingers hovered over the triggers. The bombardier called from the nose. "Starting bomb run, no turns from here." And then the world exploded. Flak shells burst so close that Harlow felt the concussions shake the bolts of his turret. Black bursts erupted around the fortress like poisonous blossoms. Sharp metal whirled through the air. A round detonated beneath the right wing, hard enough to tilt the aircraft. Men shouted. Something heavy slammed to the floor up front. "Pilot to crew, hold steady. Navigator, stay on it." Harlow didn't wait for orders. He scanned for fighters, because flak alone never came without company. The smoke thickened. The sun vanished behind it. For a moment, the fortress felt suspended between fire and cloud. The smell of cordite and burning oil drifted into the tail. Then he saw it. A streak of yellow and black plunging through the flak wall. "Bandit, 11 o'clock low, diving through the bursts." The Bf-109 shot upward like a spear, leveled out, and vanished behind a curtain of smoke. Harlow kept tracking. It reappeared instantly, diving into an attack run from below and behind, using the flak as cover. "Tail, he's lining up on us." "I see him." Harlow swung the turret, the motors whining. The fighter closed in. Its wings flashed as it fired. Orange tracers streaked past the tail, whining like angry hornets. For a split second, the Messerschmitt filled his entire field of vision. Harlow squeezed the triggers. Tracers lanced outward. The German pilot jerked sideways at the last second and peeled away, but Harlow's rounds chewed into its right wingtip. Smoke flared. "He's hit!" the waist gunner yelled. "Tail clipped him!" But the pilot regained control and retreated into the flak storm. He wasn't down, just wounded. Another burst erupted off the starboard side, close enough that the tail compartment flashed white. Harlow ducked instinctively. Bits of shrapnel clattered like hail. "Bombs away!" the bombardier shouted. The fortress suddenly rose, lighter, and the formation peeled off the target area. That was when the second wave came. 3 fighters, all climbing from the sun, the worst kind of approach. "3 bandits, 12 high!" Harlow yelled. "Fast movers!" They dived with terrifying precision, guns blazing. The pilot barked, "Tail, clear them off us!" "I'm trying, hold her steady!" But the fortress wasn't steady. Turbulence from flak tossed it around. His sight picture kept slipping. The fighters split at the last second, one diving low, 2 veering high. Harlow had a fraction of a second to choose. He picked the high left fighter. He fired a long burst that tracked across its fuselage. The fighter jerked, pulled away, and aborted the run. The second dove past him, cannons thundering, losing its chance as Heavenly Stranger jinked a few degrees. The third fighter, the one that dove low, came around for another pass. No hesitation, no weaving. A committed kill shot. "Tail, he's coming in hot!" the waist gunner shouted. Harlow planted his boots, pulled the guns down, and met the fighter head-on. It was the cleanest angle he'd had all day. He waited, held, then fired. The tracers punched straight through the nose of the Bf-109. The fighter exploded like a burst flare, disintegrating into shrapnel. The interphone erupted with cheers, curses, shock, disbelief. But Harlow didn't cheer. He simply lowered his smoking guns, swallowed hard, and whispered to himself, "That's 3 today." He didn't say it with pride. He said it with the haunted tone of a man who realized he was surviving for reasons he couldn't explain. December 11th, 1943, south of Bremen, Germany. The sky behind Heavenly Stranger flickered with burning debris from the shattered Bf-109. The blast still echoed through the tail like distant thunder. Will Harlow tightened his harness to keep himself from shaking. The cold wasn't what made him tremble. Fear, adrenaline, and the brutal clarity of survival did. The interphone carried a mixture of breathless voices. "Tail nailed another one! 3 confirmed! Holy hell, kid! Keep your eyes open, they're not done!" Harlow ignored the noise. Praise meant nothing up here. The Luftwaffe didn't care how many fighters a tail gunner had sent into the dirt. The only thing that mattered was the next attack, and the next, and the next. The fortress banked left, shaking violently as it weaved through lingering flak. The sky was black with bursts, like ink blooming through water. The pilots fought to stay in formation. The navigator called new headings through short, clipped breaths. "Turning south to exit the zone. Tighten it up." A sudden gust shoved the tail sideways, and Harlow slammed a shoulder against the frame. He winced but stayed focused. Pain would come later, if you lived long enough. Beneath the smoke, dark patchwork farmland crawled past, dotted with anti-aircraft pits that still spit fire upward. The Germans were determined, relentless, even with the fighters scattered or destroyed. A few bursts cracked so close they rattled every rib in Harlow's chest. "Jesus, that one almost took our wing off," the engineer shouted. But Harlow didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked. He knew the rhythm of the Luftwaffe by now. The big push always came after the bomb run, when the fortresses were heaviest with damage, lowest on ammunition, and struggling to escape. Fighters would regroup, come from every direction, and pick off stragglers. And Heavenly Stranger had taken enough hits that it was starting to fall behind the main formation. "Pilot to crew, we're losing manifold pressure on 3, Lieutenant Callahan said. "Trying to compensate, but we're slipping." The worst words a tail gunner could hear. A fortress that slipped was a fortress that died. Harlow clenched his jaw. "Sir, we gotta hold formation. If we drop back—" "I know, Will. Doing everything I can." The engines groaned harder. Oil streaked across the nacelle like dark tears freezing in the wind. The fortress vibrated unevenly, the frame whining in protest. Then the worst sign of all appeared. Contrails approaching from the west, thin white threads curving toward the formation like claws. "Multiple bogeys, high 5 o'clock, Harlow shouted. The waist gunners spotted them seconds later. "Confirm, fighters inbound." The interphone snapped alive with tension. "Positions! All guns ready!" Harlow swung his turret to track the approaching shapes. The contrails grew thicker, darker, until the forms of aircraft sharpened against the sun. He swallowed hard. Focke-Wulf 190s. Fast, brutal, heavily armed. And there were at least 8 of them. The pilot's voice cut in sharply. "Hold tight and stay steady. Don't drift. Don't drift." The German fighters didn't dive immediately. They were waiting, circling like hawks evaluating weakness. Harlow felt their eyes on the bomber, felt their instincts studying the gap forming behind Heavenly Stranger. They knew she was wounded. The first 2 fighters dropped suddenly, splitting into opposite spirals, one low, one high. The rest followed seconds later, forming a wide crescent around the bomber. Harlow's throat went dry. "This is a coordinated strike," he muttered. "They're setting us up." He repositioned the guns, muscles burning from the constant movement. He adjusted the heater gloves even though they weren't helping much. The sky erupted. The FW-190s came in at blistering speed, one diving from above, cannons flashing, while another rose from below to force the B-17 into a kill box. Harlow fired immediately, tracers slicing upward. "Come on! Come on!" The upper fighter broke off, missing the attack run, but the lower one stayed glued to the approach, closing fast. Harlow tracked him, his heart pounding so hard it rattled his headset. He led the shot by instinct, breath, timing, angle, then squeezed the triggers. The Brownings roared, and the FW-190 flew straight through the stream of fire. A bloom of flame burst from its engine cowling, but it kept coming, smoke trailing like a comet's tail. "Tail! He's not braking! He's staying on his run!" the waist gunner yelled. Harlow held steady, firing in disciplined bursts, refusing to panic. The fighter wobbled, losing stability, but still committed to the attack. "He's going to ram us!" someone screamed. 20 yards. 15. 10. Harlow screamed into the mic and unleashed one final chain of fire. The fighter detonated mid-air. Pieces of metal and burning fuel blasted past the tail in a fiery shower. A wing fragment punched into the fuselage, cutting through aluminum like paper. The shock slammed Harlow back into his seat. He gasped for air, chest heaving. Silence followed. Heavy, thick, suffocating silence. The pilot's voice finally cracked through. "Tail, are you still with us?" Harlow stared into the empty sky where death had been seconds earlier. His voice shook when he finally answered. Yes, sir, I'm still here." But in his mind, one thought repeated over and over. "I can't miss today. Not once. Not if any of them wanted to make it home." December 11th, 1943, south of Bremen, minutes past the last kill. The tail section of Heavenly Stranger felt unnaturally quiet after the mid-air explosion. Bits of scorched aluminum drifted in the slipstream behind the B-17 like dying embers. Will Harlow slumped forward, chest heaving, the reverberations of the last burst still pulsing through his gloved hands. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The interphone was dead still, as if the entire crew was trying to understand how they had survived not one, but multiple suicide-level attacks. Finally, a static-laced voice broke the silence. "Tail, this is Pilot. You hit him. You got him. Damn, son. You're keeping us alive." Harlow didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The air inside the tiny turret felt thin, too thin. His breath fogged the glass. Sweat beaded down his neck despite the freezing temperature. His ears rang from the explosion, but beneath that ringing was something worse. An eerie, gnawing anticipation. 3 kills was never the end. Not in Germany's backyard. The fortress creaked as it fought to regain altitude. Flak still smoldered on the horizon. Fighters were regrouping behind the smoke banks. Engines rumbled out of sync. Number 3 still sputtered, coughing oil. The frame vibrated with every gust. And then, a jolt. Sharp, violent, like the aircraft had slammed its fist into a wall. The co-pilot shouted, "Hit on the right inboard! We've lost some manifold pressure!" Alarms chirped. The fortress sagged to the right before Callahan muscled it level again. Harlow felt the change instantly. They were bleeding speed, badly. The main formation continued climbing ahead, engines roaring in synchronized power. The gap between Heavenly Stranger and the wing plane widened. 10 yards, 20, then 50. Harlow's stomach twisted. He keyed his mic, voice hard. "Pilot, we can't slip back. Not now." "I know that, Will," Callahan barked, both frustrated and terrified. "I'm giving her everything she's got." The interphone filled with overlapping reports: altitude drift, fuel pressure imbalance, a wounded electrical line in the nose. The B-17 was still flying, but it wasn't fighting at full strength, and the Luftwaffe knew exactly how to punish weakness. "Bandits reforming," the top turret called out. 5 o'clock high. They're regrouping for another run." Harlow whipped the turret around. There they were. Not the chaotic mix of lucky survivors. This time, it was a clean, deadly line of 4 FW-190s closing formation like wolves preparing for the finishing strike. Their engines glinted in the sun. Their silhouettes were sharp and confident. They weren't rushing this time. They were stalking. Harlow's pulse thudded in his ears. This was the killing move. The fighters rose high behind the bomber, keeping enough distance to avoid his guns but close enough to watch every shudder of the wounded fortress. Their wings rocked in anticipation. They were probing, reading the B-17, looking for the perfect angle. The waist gunner muttered, "They know we're crippled." The top turret responded, "They're waiting for us to fall another 50 yards. Then they'll slice us apart." Harlow felt sweat drip down his temples. He was 19 years old. He'd grown up milking cows, delivering newspapers, and listening to baseball games on crackling radios. Now he was alone in the back of a dying bomber, and 4 veteran German aces were lining up to kill him and everyone he flew with. The FW worsts accelerated. Harlow's breath froze. "They're coming in!" No one needed the call. They could feel it. The sky tensed with a predatory hum, like the air itself was drawing a blade. The fighters dropped in unison, straight onto Heavenly Stranger, straight toward the tail. The sun behind them made their approach nearly impossible to track. Their cannon muzzles flashed like sparks on an anvil. Harlow yelled, "Brake! Brake! They're coming through the sun!" But Callahan held steady. If he broke formation more, they'd fall completely out and become an isolated kill. Harlow fired first. A long, punishing burst, stitching across the sky in bright white arcs. The fighters split around it, 2 diving low, 2 climbing high. A perfect pincer. Tracer streams crisscrossed around the bomber. The upper pair dove fast, too fast for Harlow's arc. The lower pair shot straight at the waist guns, keeping him pinned high. They were professionals. They were coordinated. They had practiced this maneuver. For a split second, Harlow felt true, pure fear. Not the instinctive, hot kind, but a cold certainty. This is the one that gets us. He jerked the turret down, just in time to catch one of the low attackers slicing upward toward the tail. He fired, wild at first, then controlled bursts, leading the fighter as it climbed. Rounds sparked off its left wing, then its right, then its canopy. The 190 snapped sideways, trailing smoke, but didn't fall. The second 190 raked the right waist window with cannon fire. A deafening crash rang through the fuselage. The waist gunner screamed as shrapnel tore across his shoulder. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Harlow's world narrowed. No training, no thought, just instinct. He swung the turret hard left, almost too hard, straining the motors until they whined. The surviving lower fighter was already banking into a new approach. He squeezed the triggers. The 50s roared. The fighter hesitated, just a flicker. That flicker was all he needed. Harlow's stream of fire ripped directly through the engine block. Flames erupted. The FW-190 rolled inverted, trailing fire like a comet, then disappeared into the clouds below. The pilot shouted, "Jesus, tail, that's 4!" But Harlow didn't celebrate, because the two fighters that had climbed high at the start, they were now dropping straight down into a perfect, synchronized kill dive. And Heavenly Stranger was too slow to evade. Harlow's pupils shrank. This time, they were aiming for him. December 11th, 1943, over Germany, seconds before impact. The two FW-190s came down like twin spears of sunlight, descending in a synchronized murder dive, the kind of precision strike only the most disciplined, most experienced Luftwaffe aces could pull off. Their wings shimmered in the glare, making them look less like machines and more like predators streaking from heaven itself. Will Harlow saw the angle instantly. He didn't need training manuals, he didn't need warnings. He felt it in his bones. This was the end game. One fighter angled toward the right side of the B-17, forcing the waist gunners to split their fire. The other was aiming directly at the tail, not just to damage it, but to obliterate it. A clean shot to sever the rear fuselage. A kill shot. Harlow's heartbeat slowed. Everything else sped up. The FW-190s opened fire. Twin streams of 20mm cannon shells stormed the sky, ripping white-hot lines through the air. The sound was like ripping metal mixed with thunder, deafening even through the headset. Cannon rounds slammed into the fuselage, tearing jagged holes through aluminum like paper. Harlow ducked, instinctively pressing his helmet to the armor plate as shards of plexiglass burst around him. Then he rose. He swung the tail turret with every ounce of strength. The motors whined, almost screaming at the strain. The FW-190 on the right flashed across his view, too fast, too high. But the other one, the one aiming for him, was locked on. 10 seconds from ramming distance, maybe less. The fighter's propeller looked like a spinning silver disc. Its nose guns flashed relentlessly. Bright streaks crossed between them like fiery threads. Harlow didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He simply fired. Long, savage bursts, the kind that shredded barrels and tore through ammunition belts. The recoil was brutal, shaking the turret, rattling his teeth. But he held steady. Held. Tracers tore into the sky, and for a terrifying moment, nothing hit. The fighter kept coming. It grew larger in his sight picture. Larger. Until Harlow could see the pilot. A pale face, goggles glinting, a jaw clenched in total commitment. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Harlow led the shot one more inch, just one, and squeezed the triggers so hard his fingers cramped. The tracers connected. The FW-190's engine erupted. The fighter didn't explode. It simply stopped, like someone had pulled its soul out. Flames tore across the cowling. The propeller shredded itself. The nose dipped violently. Then, at full speed, the 190 passed inches under Harlow's turret, trailing a river of fire as it plunged into the earth below. The slipstream jolted the tail, nearly spinning the turret sideways. The interphone erupted with shouts. "Tail got him! He missed us by a hair! Holy hell, Will! That kid just killed an ace!" But there was no time to breathe. The second FW-190, the one that had pulled wide, was already looping back for another pass. Smarter. Lower. Using the cloud bank to hide his angle. Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Bandit returning, 6 low. Fast!" he shouted. The waist gunners opened up, but the shot was bad, too shallow. Their rounds sprayed harmlessly beneath the fighter. The FW-190 broke through the haze with a sudden burst of speed, cannons flashing again. The B-17 bucked violently as rounds smashed into the right side of the fuselage. The oxygen tank behind the radio room ruptured, releasing a white plume like smoke. "I've got him!" Harlow roared. He swung back hard, the turret motors nearly stalling. The fighter's angle was perfect. Too perfect. The German ace had committed fully, trusting his speed and the bomber's weakness. The FW-190 filled Harlow's gunsight. He exhaled, squeezed, and time stopped. His tracers walked across the fighter's fuselage, left wing root, cockpit rail, and then the canopy. The engine burst in a brilliant flash. A fireball erupted, spiraling outward. The FW-190 disintegrated mid-air, scattering into burning fragments that fell like meteors. The crew roared over the interphone. "That's 5! He's insane! He's an absolute machine! Tail, you just saved the whole damn squadron!" But Harlow didn't celebrate. Because something strange happened in that moment, something he would never forget. As the final FW-190 burst apart, Harlow felt a numbness wash over him. Not fear, not shock. Something colder. Detachment. Like he had stepped outside himself, watching from somewhere far away as his hands reloaded the guns automatically, as his breath steadied on instinct alone, as his ears tuned out the chaos and fixed only on the hum of the engines. He whispered under his breath, almost without realizing, "Just get us home. Get us home." The pilot's voice broke through, shaky but steady. "All crew, prepare to break off the target area. We're hit bad but still flying. Hold positions. Tail, keep those eyes sharp. You're the reason we're alive." Harlow lifted his gaze toward the distant horizon, the direction of England, now nothing more than a distant dream hidden behind miles of hostile sky. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a ghost still clinging to a living body. December 11th, 1943, North Sea inbound to England, late afternoon. The sky finally began to open, the smoke thinning into pale streaks as Heavenly Stranger limped westward, a wounded giant refusing to fall. The engines growled unevenly, especially number 3, which coughed every few seconds like an old man fighting for breath. But they were still flying. Will Harlow sat hunched in the tail turret, helmet resting lightly against the armor plate, eyes half-lidded but still darting across the horizon. The cold gnawed at his fingers, even through the heated gloves. The metal beneath him vibrated endlessly, numbing his bones. His voice was hoarse when he checked in. "Tell the pilot, rear sky's clear for now." "Copy, Tail," Lieutenant Callahan replied, his exhaustion bleeding through the static. "We're crossing back over the coast in 3 minutes. If they're going to hit us again, it'll be soon." Harlow knew that too well. The Luftwaffe loved to attack right at the edge of the North Sea. It gave them clean escape routes, and the bombers had nowhere to emergency land. His eyes sharpened again, scanning every wisp of cloud, every flicker of sunlight. Nothing. But that didn't ease the tightness in his chest. Around him, the crew continued assessing damage. The waist gunner's shoulder wound had been bandaged with a torn parachute strap. The ball turret gunner reported limited traverse, likely from a bent linkage. The radio man worked furiously with damaged wires to keep communication alive. They were each fighting their own battles to keep the fortress in the air. The navigator spoke up, voice thin. "If we hold this heading, we'll reach the English coast in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. To a man sitting alone in a glass dome at the back of a crippled bomber, that sounded like a lifetime. Harlow kept counting seconds. 10,000 feet beneath them, the gray surface of the North Sea stretched endlessly. Cold, silent, unforgiving. The kind of water that swallowed aircraft whole. No one said it aloud, but every man on board understood. If they ditched out here, nobody would survive long. The interphone crackled. "Tail, this is top turret. You hanging in there, buddy?" Harlow almost smiled. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Charles Benton, older by 6 years, a man built like a steelworker and just as tough. "Yeah," Harlow replied quietly. "Still breathing." "You did damn good today," Benton said. "You saved us, don't forget that." He didn't answer, didn't know how to, because saving the crew brought its own kind of weight, a heaviness that sank deep into the bones, deeper than fear. 5 fighters today, 5 men he had killed, 5 families who'd never see their sons again. But he couldn't carry those thoughts now. He set them aside like a man placing stones on the ground, promising to come back for them later. The pilot's voice cut in sharply. "All eyes open. Radar reports possible bandits taking off from the Dutch coast." Harlow straightened instantly. His fingers tightened around the gun grips. He scanned harder, searching for the familiar shapes he'd come to hate and fear. The pointed nose of a 109, the radial engine of a 190, the flicker of sunlight off wings. 1 minute passed, 2, 3. Nothing. The crew held its breath collectively until the radio man finally said, "Radar contacts appear to be circling inland, not pursuing." A wave of relief broke across the interphone, but not for Harlow. He didn't relax. Not until he saw England. And finally, blessedly, after a stretch of cold horizon, the faint outline of land appeared like a ghost emerging from fog. "Coast in sight," the navigator announced. Harlow's shoulders sagged for the first time in hours. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. The pilot spoke quietly. "We're too damaged to land with the group. Prepare for solo landing." That meant no escort, no formation protection, no shared landing pattern. Just one crippled bomber limping home with failing systems. The engines sputtered again. The aircraft dropped 50 feet before Callahan corrected. "Stay with me, stay with me," he muttered to the plane as though coaxing a wounded friend. The approach took an eternity. The wind grew rougher near the airfield. The wings bounced, the frame groaned. The landing gear whined as it extended, slowly, reluctantly, like a tired animal stretching its bones. "Tail, you'll feel some hard shake on landing," the pilot warned. "I'm ready," Harlow answered. But he wasn't. The moment the wheels touched, the entire tail section jolted violently. The airframe protested with a long metallic scream. The bomber bounced, once, twice, then finally settled, rolling along the runway in a wounded stagger. Harlow gripped the turret housing to steady himself. And then, silence. The engines powered down. The fortress slowed. And Heavenly Stranger, battered, scorched, and bleeding oil, finally came to a stop. The interphone filled with quiet breathing, nothing else. Then Benton spoke softly. "We made it home." Harlow didn't move, didn't speak. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the cold glass. Outside, ground crews were already running toward the bomber, staring in disbelief at the shredded tail, the bullet-riddled fuselage, the missing panels. One mechanic pointed directly at the tail turret. "That kid kept this damn ship alive," he whispered. Harlow didn't hear it. He was staring at his gloves, trembling again, and suddenly aware of a strange warmth on his cheek. He touched it. A tear. But it wasn't sadness. It was the release of everything he had held inside since the first Messerschmitt appeared behind them. The pilot finally broke the silence. "Crew, mission complete. Good work. Let's go home." For the first time in hours, Will Harlow allowed himself a long, slow exhale, the kind that shakes its way out of the chest. He was 19 years old. He had just survived hell, and he had carried 8 men home on his shoulders. History would record it as a blind shot, a miracle hit, a statistical impossibility. But to the men of Heavenly Stranger, it was something far simpler. It was the moment a quiet kid in the tail turret became the reason every one of them lived to see another sunrise.